Welcome to Open Hearts Conversations, the podcast where every conversation begins with an open heart. I am your host, Pumelele. In this podcast, we explore the beautiful complexities of life through open, honest, and vulnerable discussions. Here, I hope that you feel heard, seen, and held. Thank you for being part of this community. Enjoy the episode. So on today's episode, I would like to tackle a bit of a complex topic, and I'm sure this is something that we can all relate to or have experienced in our lives, and that is grief and loss. But before I get into the episode itself, I just want to send out my love and my heart to anyone who might be going through a difficult time right now. If you're finding yourself grieving something or someone or anything of that sort, I also want to extend a trigger warning to you. If this is a sensitive time and you maybe not have the capacity to be able to receive this kind of content, I would like for you to really look after yourself at this time. So take care of you and maybe skip this one for now until such a time that you are able to receive it. Yeah. So grief. I really wanted to discuss grief and loss because it is something that I am currently experiencing, and I have been deep in thoughts and realized that this has been almost a recurring theme over some time now, months, if I can say. And this grief is also just quite different, grieving and losing different things, people, etc. I want to acknowledge it and also unpack just my own feelings about it, my own thoughts on how we cope with loss. So yeah, let us get into the episode. So often I think that we think of grief in this very linear way, almost the same way that we think about life even. You know, when we were young, we thought life was very linear. We would go through these phases of our lives in a very straightforward way. But I think as we grow, we realize that actually that's not how things happen. And so in the same way, you know, with grief, because you think about it as the loss occurs, you feel sad, and then you move on. But yeah, I think that is far from the truth of what actually happens. And I know that it's unique and different for each person. But I really want to talk about that mess that happens in between, the part where we let go of things and the feelings in between where we're really trying to let go, and it almost feels like a game of tug of war. You know, you're wanting to move forward, or you want to move that way, but you feel like you're being pulled back. You take a few steps forward. You feel like you've reached a certain level of healing or progress, and then you pulled back a few steps backwards. You know, sometimes you fall. Sometimes you really conquer and you move forward. So I want to unpack that. And, you know, I think a good place to start where we can all relate is in friendships, right? I think there is loss that can occur in our friendships, and it takes different shapes and forms. You know, you create these connections with people that, you grow really fond of and you come to love. And over a period of time, life can take us in many different directions. You find that sometimes your values start to clash and they may change and you're not on the same page anymore. Or there's a shift in priorities. There's particular life events that happen that change people or even change their priorities, like people getting into real serious romantic relationships, people having children, people just growing up and finding new different interests, their careers changing, moving away, etc., etc. You get the idea. So when these kinds of life transitions happen, they also have an impact in your relationships and the way in which it functions and how it looks, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, we reach a point where you have to let go of certain people because the relationship just is no longer working, or it just is not serving you in that moment. And that part of letting go is the tricky part. And I think it's quite difficult because society tells you that if something is not serving you anymore, you should just cut it off or just let it go and move on. And it's the how that, nobody tells you. How do I actually do that? Because the language is so simple. Just move on, cut them off, cut them out of your life. And I think the reality is that there's so much nuance to that, because we are talking about years and years of building a relationship with a person, and somehow you're just supposed to let them go like they never existed in your life. It's easier said than done. And the grieving process for the memories that you guys have shared, the history that you've built over the years, and just the person themselves. You know how possessive we get in friendships? We say, my person, my people, my best friend. So letting go of someone like that is tricky. And I think about this concept of closure, and closure is like this final conversation, right? It's meant to be this final conversation to say, okay, so we're ending things, we're breaking up, and then you move on and you go your separate ways. But unfortunately, it's not everyone who gets to have that conversation. It's not everyone who gets an opportunity to have their final say, and sometimes it's simply just being able to acknowledge the loss in itself and accepting that this is the reality of the situation, and you now beginning the process of moving on from that. Now, the topic of friendships and friendship breakups brings about also a lot of grief in itself, because it is so much more complex, in the sense that I personally have experienced grief in my friendships, but not necessarily because we broke up, but the change in the dynamic of the relationship also is a loss in itself. We don't relate to each other in the same way that we did. I am no longer taking up that role that I used to in your life, right? And these are real things that happen so very often. Like the example that I made about your friend being in a serious relationship now. For example, their first go-to person may have been you as a friend, but now them finding a partner means that their first go-to person is their partner, and that's okay, and that is good, right? but it's a loss. It's a loss, and it's a change, a difference in the dynamic of your relationship. And so it's real, and it's okay. And I think it's something that we do need to really acknowledge, because it's almost like it's a consequence of growing up and just evolving as people. Loss happens, and the grief that comes after also occurs. And that's something that we should also pay attention to, you know? And so that's why I say that it's not just an easy, clean cut, process of letting go. It is something that is deeply, deeply painful, and it also presents itself in different ways. And I don't know if we recognize this in ourselves and in other people as well, but you see, this pain can also present itself as resentment sometimes. It can become avoidant. It can present itself as jealousy sometimes. But I think recognizing the root of where all of these feelings and emotions come from is important, because then if we're able to recognize the root cause of this, then we have the opportunity to be able to deal with it. And I think friends play such a huge role in our lives, so that when things change, we are also affected, like on a really deep level. I think I want to validate this. I want to validate this feeling in myself. I want to validate it in you and in anybody else who might be experiencing this. That it's okay to feel heartbroken over losing a friend, losing a relationship, because that matters too. You need to allow yourself to grieve. And so, just to move on from that, I want to share something really personal, a different kind of loss that I personally have experienced recently. So I'm recording this on the 29th of June, which, the last weekend of my birth month. Is it birth month or birthday month? I don't know. So I recently turned 29, and I had plans for my birthday and my brother's birthday, so I decided to plan a trip home. I was meant to arrive on the day of my brother's birthday and surprise him, because he didn't know that I was coming. He's 10, by the way. So I planned a trip home, and it's all good and dandy, But as I arrived at a not so pleasant situation, because my cousin had passed. My goal for just this trip in itself, I just wanted to feel that, that wholesomeness you get and that restoration you get from being home after not seeing your family for like months. So that was my plan. I wanted to feel that. I just wanted to just gather myself again, as we say. So the reception wasn't great, because we had just experienced the loss. So my cousin, she's my sister, actually. Like I did mention in the first episode, where I said that I grew up, surrounded by many women. So, she's my aunt's child. So it makes her my sister. So that was difficult. And also in the way that it happened, that was difficult to deal with, and it's quite traumatizing to me, to my family. So there's a lot that we are currently just having to deal with. So there's also a lot of emotion. My heart is broken. My heart is broken. I did not expect to lose my sister. You don't expect to lose a young person in your family, and there's just so many feelings, thoughts of, what could have been, if anything could have prevented it, all of that. And I know that there's nothing that we could have done, and maybe it was meant to happen that way. But we are dealing with the questions and the emotions, the anger, the pain, the hurt and the sadness, It's dealing with all of that. And so being back to my life here now, I feel like I am now having the opportunity to deal with these feelings in a bit of a different way, because I'm recognizing the difference of being in mourning whilst you are with family and at home. And when you're a family, you're surrounded by everyone who loves the person, who knew and loved the person, and you are together in this. You can be able to hold space for each other. You're able to talk about her, the memories, talk through your own grief, be able to hug and cuddle. My brother does that. I think my little brother's love language is physical touch. He's so affectionate. You can love. You can like laugh. What am I saying? You can laugh. Okay. Yeah, and just share in the loss and the sadness. And so I've had to come back to my life here now, and because I live far away, I've not connected to that anymore. Like on the physical level, where I can't be physically with my family. So I'm having to reintegrate back into my own life and adjust here. And I'm recognizing how that is also different. People who I come into contact with and know what has happened, I can see, sometimes the sympathy in their eyes, but then that also makes me feel weird sometimes. Like, I don't want you to feel too sorry for me, I don't like the sad look in people's eyes. But then also I don't want people to not acknowledge what I'm also going through. So, yes, and being on your own and having things come up is hard as well. So, and there's also something about negative emotions, and I feel like that negative emotions sometimes they draw other emotions, like sadness invites even more sadness, unfortunately. And this being such a loss for me, like such a big loss, I recognize how anything bad that has occurred, or any feelings that I've been having about my own life that are not so good, are also coming up. So it's almost like feeling so overwhelmed, with all of these emotions. And I recognize that this is going to take some time, and it is a painful journey, but pain also is inevitable. Pain is part of the journey. Pain is part of growing up. And when we try and comfort people, we often tell them that it'll get better. It's like saying, look forward to the good things that are coming. And that is so well intentioned. I say this to people. We all say this to people, but I feel like also that has the potential of invalidating what is happening currently and now. And it really does have, the potential to minimize the pain that you're experiencing. It's almost like we're saying, don't focus on this. And I think really sometimes it's okay to be consumed by the pain, for a while, for however long you need, because then suppressing that pain and those feelings, it only prolongs the process. When you're suppressed, you're not dealing with what is happening currently. You're not present in this moment in your emotions. And I think that's where the danger is. Sorry. But yeah, I really do think that is a dangerous way to exist. And I also recognize how this period and being with your pain can also be deeply isolating. It has the potential to push us away from people, and people who might also be able to offer support. Because just as much as physical pain needs tending to, emotional pain needs tending to as well. It needs the same level of attention. And grief is one of the hardest things that we have to deal with as people. It is a long journey. It is lifelong, to be honest, and there are good days and also not so good days. But when we allow ourselves to really feel the full spectrum of our emotions, I think that somewhere and somehow we can be able to find healing and hopefully emerge, as stronger people. We are allowed to grieve a loss, and we are also allowed to grieve a loss of a friend, of a relationship. We are also allowed to grieve a loss of a dream. We are allowed to grieve a loss of potential of a particular life. All of these things matter, and they are important. And so as I deal with my own grief and my own loss, there is a lot that is coming up for me right now, and a lot of negative emotions coming up, and them being so present and so often also scares me. Also, just recognizing the way in which it's impacting my life right now and the way that I'm relating to people. But I know that I am not alone, and there are other people that are experiencing the same, if not similar things. And somewhere and at some point, I'm going to emerge out of this having gained, some level of wisdom, having gained some insight, having gained something. And in order for us to be able to gain anything, we have to lose another. And that's exactly just how present grief is in our lives. And that is why it is so important to acknowledge it. Because if you attain anything, if you achieve anything, we most likely would have lost or sacrificed something. And you see it sometimes with people when they reach like a massive milestone, and they don't feel or experience the happiness, and they wonder why. And I think it could be just that grief that you're not acknowledging in that moment. So we allow ourselves to celebrate achievements, but also sometimes we do need to grieve the sacrifices, to grieve the things that we let go of in order for us to move on to a different stage in our lives, to move on to something else. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to unpack in this episode. And if you are struggling with grief right now, I want you to know that you are not alone. I hope that you can find comfort and that you can be supported by the people around you, or any resource that is around you. And I also want to give thanks to you for listening to this episode and really just receiving me and making space to receive me as I just unpack my own feelings and navigate my own journey. So thank you for listening and for being here. Thank you for listening to this open heart conversation. If you resonated with today's episode, please do subscribe and leave a 5-star rating, and also share this with others who might also benefit from it. So join the conversation on social media. I will leave my information in the show notes. I would love to hear your thoughts as well as your experiences. So until next time, keep your hearts open. Thank you. Love you. Bye.